In a kingdom ruled by darkness and ancient vampire power, a cold and feared vampire king carries a deadly curse. He must marry the first woman he touches, or both of them will die. For years he avoids every living soul, until one night fate strikes. A frightened palace maid, a girl everyone ignores and mistreats, accidentally crashes into him, and the curse awakens. Suddenly, the weakest girl in the castle becomes the center of royal destiny, hunted by jealous nobles and protected by the most powerful vampire in the world. But what no one expected was that the quiet maid they mocked might become the strongest queen the kingdom has ever seen. If you love dramatic vampire stories, powerful justice, and emotional romance that will keep you watching till the end, then make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable stories. The Vampire King carried a curse that would force him to marry the first woman he touched. But the night fate awakened, the last person he expected to bind his destiny was a trembling palace maid. For 3 long years, the Palace of Nightfall stood like a frozen kingdom, ruled by a king who walked among thousands yet touched no one. King Lucien Dravenhart, the most feared vampire ruler in the northern realms, lived under a curse older than the castle walls themselves. According to the ancient spell placed upon him by a dying witch, the first woman whose skin touched his would become bound to him by blood and fate. If he refused to marry her within 90 days, the curse would claim both their lives. Because of this, the king lived like a shadow. Servants stepped aside before he entered a room. Guards kept distance, and even the nobles who feared him more than death avoided standing too close. Lucien had accepted a life of loneliness to protect innocent lives from the dangerous magic that followed him everywhere. To the kingdom he appeared cold, untouchable, and distant, but the truth was much heavier. Every day he carried the fear that one mistake could destroy someone's life. While the nobles whispered about curses and power, someone else quietly lived inside the palace walls without anyone ever noticing her existence. Her name was Mira, a young maid who had worked in the castle since she was 16. Life had never been kind to her. Her father had died in a mine accident, and her mother passed away shortly after from illness. With no family left, Mira had taken the lowest job the palace offered just to survive. The other servants often pushed their work onto her, and the noble ladies treated her like a piece of furniture that happened to move. But Mira had something rare that cruelty had not taken away from her, a quiet heart full of kindness. She helped the old kitchen workers when their hands shook from exhaustion, shared food with the stable boys when they had none, and spoke gently to the palace animals as if they understood her. No one important ever noticed her small acts of compassion, yet she continued doing them anyway. That night, a violent storm rolled across the mountains surrounding the castle. Thunder shook the towers, while rain crashed against the palace windows like a warning from the heavens. Mira had just finished cleaning the west corridor when shouting suddenly echoed through the hallway. 2 drunken noblemen had cornered her near the stairwell, mocking her for accidentally brushing against one of their expensive cloaks earlier. Their laughter filled the corridor with cruel amusement as they blocked her path. Fear tightened around her chest like iron. Mira had learned long ago that arguing with nobles only made things worse. With shaking hands, she apologized and tried to slip past them, but they refused to move. Desperation took over. The moment their attention shifted, Mira ran. Her worn shoes echoed loudly as she rushed through the long stone corridors, heart racing as thunder roared outside. She turned one corner, then another, barely able to see through the dim torchlight. Tears blurred her vision as she hurried forward, hoping only to escape humiliation. Then suddenly she crashed straight into someone. The collision was strong enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Strong arms caught her before she could fall, steady and powerful. For a single frozen moment, everything went silent. Skin touched skin. A sudden wave of icy energy exploded between them. The torches along the walls flickered wildly as dark crimson lights spiraled around their hands. Mira felt a strange burning cold travel up her arm, as if ancient magic had awakened inside her veins. When she looked down, a glowing symbol, ancient and terrifying, was slowly forming on her wrist. Her heart nearly stopped. Slowly, trembling, she lifted her gaze. Standing before her was the one man every soul in the kingdom feared to even approach. King Lucien Dravenhart. And the glowing mark on their wrists meant one terrifying truth. The curse had finally awakened, and the powerless maid had just become the vampire king's destined bride. The moment the curse marked the maid's wrist, the entire vampire kingdom realized something. Impossible had happened. The powerless girl everyone ignored had just become the fate of their king. For several seconds after the collision, the corridor remained frozen in stunned silence. Mira could barely breathe as the strange crimson mark burned cold against her wrist, glowing faintly like living fire. Her entire body trembled with fear because she already knew what it meant. Every servant in the palace had heard the whispers about the king's curse. The first woman he touched would be bound to him by fate. Slowly, almost cautiously, King Lucien released her hands and stepped back as if the air itself had turned dangerous. His sharp crimson eyes locked onto the glowing symbol on his own wrist, identical to the one now burning on Mira's skin. For a king who ruled armies and commanded fear across nations, his expression revealed something rare: shock mixed with frustration, as if destiny had played a cruel joke on him. Within moments, the quiet corridor erupted with activity. Guards rushed forward, drawn by the burst of supernatural energy that had flashed through the palace halls. Several nobles who had been passing nearby stopped in their tracks, staring with disbelief at the strange scene unfolding before them. Their eyes moved from the powerful vampire king to the frightened maid standing in front of him. Whispers spread instantly like wildfire. A servant girl? Impossible. A maid becoming tied to the king's curse was something no one in the royal court had ever imagined. Mira felt those judging eyes stabbing into her from every direction, making her wish she could disappear into the stone floor. She tried to step away, lowering her head in fear, but Lucien raised one hand slightly, and the guards immediately froze in place. His voice when he finally spoke was calm, but heavy with authority that made the entire corridor fall silent. "Everyone leave," the king ordered coldly. The nobles hesitated, clearly curious about the shocking situation, but none of them were foolish enough to disobey the vampire king. One by one they backed away, until only Lucien, Mira, and two distant guards remained in the hall. Mira's heart pounded so loudly she thought the king might hear it. She could not even lift her eyes to look at him properly. Instead, she whispered nervously, "Your Majesty, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to touch you." Her voice shook with pure panic because she believed she had just ruined the life of the most powerful man in the kingdom. For a long moment, Lucien said nothing. He simply studied the girl standing before him, the worn maid uniform, the trembling hands, the quiet fear in her posture. She was clearly not someone who belonged anywhere near the throne. Yet fate had chosen her. Lucien slowly exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair as if trying to calm his thoughts. For years he had carefully avoided every possible contact with people, sacrificing companionship and normal life to protect others from this curse. And now, in a single careless moment, everything had changed. The mark glowing on his wrist confirmed the truth he could no longer escape. The curse had awakened. Finally, he looked at Mira again, and his voice softened slightly, though it still carried the weight of a ruler used to command. "What is your name?" he asked. "Mira. Mira Elwood, Your Majesty," she answered quietly. Lucien nodded once, as if memorizing it. Then he said something that stunned her even more than the curse itself. "From this moment forward, no one in this palace will harm or insult you again. You are under my protection." Mira's eyes widened in disbelief. But somewhere else in the palace, hidden in the shadows of the royal court, powerful nobles had already begun whispering dangerous plans. because a maid, becoming the future queen, was something many of them would never accept. At night the vampire king placed the frightened maid under his protection. The royal court realized something terrifying. The weakest girl in the palace had suddenly become the most dangerous person in the kingdom. The news spread through the palace faster than wildfire through dry forest. By the next morning, every corridor, servant quarter, and noble chamber was buzzing with whispers. The cursed mark on the king's wrist had finally appeared, and the woman bound to him was not a princess, not a noble daughter, not even someone from a respected family. She was a maid. Mira Elwood, the quiet servant who spent her days cleaning floors and carrying trays, had somehow become the woman destiny had tied to the most powerful vampire ruler in the world. For the nobles of Nightfall Court, this was more than shocking. It was unacceptable. Many of them had spent years secretly hoping the king would one day choose a queen from among their powerful families. Such a marriage could bring wealth, influence, and power beyond imagination. But now all those ambitions had been destroyed by a girl who owned nothing but a worn servant dress and a kind heart. Mira herself could barely understand what was happening. After the strange encounter with the king, the guards had escorted her to a quiet guest chamber far away from the servant quarters she had lived in for years. The room was larger than any place she had ever slept before. Soft candlelight filled the chamber, and warm blankets covered the large bed near the window. For someone who had grown used to cold attic rooms and hard wooden floors, the sudden comfort felt unreal. Yet instead of relief, Mira felt only fear twisting inside her chest. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the glowing mark on her wrist. It still burned faintly, pulsing with ancient magic she could not understand. That mark meant one terrifying truth. The king would have 90 days to marry her, or the curse would kill them both. Later that evening, the palace doors opened quietly, and King Lucien himself entered the room. Mira immediately stood up, lowering her head respectfully, her hands trembling slightly. She had never spoken to a king before, and certainly not one whose fate was now tied to her life. Lucien looked different, without the intimidating distance of the throne room. Up close, he appeared less like a cold ruler, and more like a man carrying an invisible burden. His sharp crimson eyes briefly glanced at the mark on her wrist before returning to her face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick with tension, as if both were struggling to accept the strange twist of destiny that had connected them. Instead of anger or impatience, the king simply nodded as if he understood perfectly. He walked toward the large window, overlooking the dark mountains surrounding the palace. Thunder rolled softly in the distance as night settled over the kingdom. "You have no reason to trust this situation," Lucien continued. "But I want you to know one thing clearly. You will not be forced into anything you do not choose." Mira looked up in surprise at those words. A king offering a maid a choice was something she had never imagined hearing. Lucien then revealed the truth of the curse in more detail. The ancient magic demanded marriage within 90 days to survive. However, he had already ordered the royal scholars and sorcerers to search for another solution. If there was any possible way to break the curse without forcing her into a life she never wanted, he intended to find it. Mira listened silently, feeling something unexpected rising inside her chest. Not fear, but a strange sense of respect for the powerful vampire king standing before her. But far beyond that quiet chamber, dark conversations were already beginning among the nobles. Because many powerful figures in the vampire court had already decided one dangerous thing. If the maid disappeared, the curse might disappear with her. While the vampire king searched for a way to break the curse, the royal court secretly decided on a darker solution. If the maid died, the problem would disappear. The Palace of Nightfall had always been a place of beauty, power, and hidden danger. But after the curse awakened, the atmosphere inside the castle changed completely. Servants whispered nervously in the corridors. Nobles gathered in quiet corners exchanging suspicious glances, and everywhere Mira walked, she felt the heavy weight of unseen eyes watching her. Only a day earlier, she had been invisible to everyone in the palace. Now she was suddenly the center of attention, and not the kind anyone would wish for. The glowing mark on her wrist could not be hidden forever, and the moment people saw it, their reactions were filled with disbelief, jealousy, or quiet hatred. Some nobles bowed politely because the king had ordered her protection, but their smiles never reached their eyes. King Lucien had placed royal guards outside Mira's chamber and instructed the palace staff to treat her with respect. But even that could not stop the growing resentment inside the vampire court. To many powerful families, Mira's existence threatened years of political plans. If the king truly married a simple human maid, the noble bloodlines that had dreamed of becoming the royal family would lose everything. Wealth, influence, and control over the kingdom would slip through their fingers because of a girl who had once scrubbed floors in their hallways. That humiliation was something many of them simply refused to accept. Later that evening, Mira was escorted to the royal dining hall for the first time. The king had insisted she eat with him, not as a servant, but as his guest. The massive hall glowed with golden candlelight, and dozens of nobles sat along the long table wearing elegant clothing that cost more than Mira had ever earned in her life. When she entered beside the king, the room fell into uncomfortable silence. Every pair of eyes in the hall fixed on her at once. Mira felt her hands tremble slightly, but she forced herself to keep walking. She remembered something her mother had once told her long ago. Kindness and dignity were things no one could take from you unless you surrendered them yourself. Lucien noticed her nervousness immediately. As they reached the center of the hall, he spoke clearly so that every noble could hear him. His voice carried the quiet authority of a ruler who did not need to raise his tone to command obedience. Lady Mira Elwood will remain under my protection while we search for a solution to the curse, he announced calmly. Anyone who disrespects her will answer directly to me. The warning was simple but powerful. No one in the kingdom wanted to challenge the vampire king openly. Despite his protection, Mira still felt the tension growing in the room like a coming storm. Some nobles politely lowered their heads, but others exchanged silent glances that carried darker intentions. One noblewoman in particular, Lady Seraphine, watched Mira with a cold smile that made chills crawl across her skin. Seraphine came from one of the oldest vampire families in the kingdom, and had once expected to become queen herself. Now she studied Mira, as if measuring a threat she intended to remove. That same night, while the palace slept under the quiet moonlight, shadows moved through the servant corridors. A hooded figure quietly unlocked the door to Mira's chamber. Because somewhere in the palace, someone had decided the easiest way to break the king's curse was to make sure the maid never lived long enough to marry him. The assassins thought the powerless maid would be the easiest target in the palace. But they forgot one terrifying truth. The vampire king was already watching. The palace slept beneath a quiet silver moon, but danger moved silently through its ancient corridors. The hooded figure who had unlocked Mira's chamber door stepped carefully into the room, carrying a thin dagger coated with dark poison strong enough to end even a vampire's life. The assassin had been sent by powerful nobles who believed removing the maid would solve everything. If the girl bound to the king's curse disappeared, the nobles hoped the king would be forced to seek another solution, and their dreams of controlling the throne might still survive. To them, Mira Elwood was nothing more than an obstacle, a fragile human girl with no power and no protection once the lights went out. The assassin moved quietly toward the bed where Mira slept, unaware that the palace itself was already alert to the danger. Just moments earlier, in another wing of the castle, King Lucien had been unable to sleep. Since the night the curse awakened, something inside him had felt different, as if the magic binding him to Mira allowed him to sense when she was in danger. While studying ancient books in the royal library, a sudden sharp pain burned across the mark on his wrist. The glowing symbol pulsed violently, sending a cold warning through his veins. Lucien immediately understood what it meant. The curse was reacting to a threat against the woman bound to his fate. Without hesitation, the vampire king moved faster than any human eye could follow, disappearing from the library like a shadow carried by the wind. Inside Mira's chamber, the assassin slowly raised the poisoned dagger. The moonlight shining through the window revealed Mira's peaceful face as she slept, completely unaware of the danger hovering over her. The blade began to descend toward her chest. Then suddenly, the door behind the assassin exploded open. A powerful force slammed into the attacker, sending the dagger flying across the room. The hooded figure crashed into the wall with enough strength to crack the stone. Before the assassin could even react, a cold hand gripped his throat and lifted him from the ground. King Lucien's crimson eyes glowed with terrifying intensity as he held the intruder effortlessly in the air. His voice was low and deadly calm. "You chose the wrong night to enter this room." The noise had already awakened Mira, who sat up in shock, her heart racing as she tried to understand what was happening. She watched in disbelief as the powerful vampire king held the assassin like a helpless puppet. For the first time she saw the true strength behind the quiet ruler who had promised her protection. The guards quickly rushed into the room, taking control of the captured attacker, while Lucien slowly lowered his hand. The assassin was dragged away for interrogation, but the message was already clear. Someone in the royal court had tried to murder the woman bound to the king's curse. Lucien turned toward Mira, and the anger in his eyes softened slightly when he saw how frightened she looked. "You're safe," he said quietly. But that night revealed something even more dangerous than the assassination attempt, because the attack proved one undeniable truth to the entire kingdom. Someone powerful enough to challenge the vampire king had declared war on the future queen. When the final day of the curse arrived, the entire kingdom gathered to see whether the vampire king would marry the humble maid, or whether both of them would die before sunrise. The Palace of Nightfall had never been as tense as it was on the 90th day after the curse awakened. News had spread across the kingdom that the ancient spell-binding King Lucien Dravenhart would reach its final moment before midnight. If the king and the woman marked by the curse did not marry before the last hour ended, the magic would claim both their lives. Nobles filled the grand hall dressed in dark formal robes, whispering anxiously while waiting to see how the king would decide. Some believed Lucien would never marry a human maid, even if the curse demanded it. Others secretly hoped Mira would somehow disappear before the ceremony began. But the truth was far more powerful than any rumor spreading through the court. Mira stood quietly near the balcony, overlooking the royal courtyard, staring at the glowing mark on her wrist that had changed her life forever. Over the past weeks, she had experienced more fear, danger, and attention than she had known in her entire life before. She had survived cruel whispers, assassination attempts, and the weight of an entire court judging her worth. Yet through everything, something inside her had changed. The frightened maid, who once believed she was invisible, had slowly discovered courage she never knew she possessed. She had seen the real Lucien as well, the lonely king behind the crown, who carried the burden of protecting everyone around him. Their bond had grown not through grand promises, but through quiet moments of trust, respect, and understanding. Behind her, the doors to the balcony opened softly. Lucien stepped outside, the cool night wind moving through his dark hair as he approached her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The moonlight reflected in his crimson eyes as he looked at the glowing mark on their wrists. For weeks he had searched every ancient library and consulted every sorcerer in the kingdom, trying to break the curse without forcing Mira into a life she never chose. But every answer had led to the same truth. There was only one way to end the curse. Finally, Lucien spoke quietly. "You still have a choice," he said gently. "If you wish to leave this palace tonight, I will make sure you are protected. I will face the curse alone." Mira turned toward him, surprised by his words. For a long moment she studied the king's face, seeing not the feared ruler the kingdom whispered about, but the man who had risked everything to keep her safe. Then she shook her head softly. "You protected me when no one else ever did," she replied. "You treated a maid with respect when others treated me like I didn't exist. I'm not afraid anymore." Her voice remained calm but steady. "If fate brought us together, then I will face it with you." Those simple words seemed to lift a weight Lucien had carried for years. For the first time since the curse began, a faint smile appeared on his face. Moments later, they entered the grand hall together. The entire court watched in stunned silence as Mira walked beside the king with quiet confidence. The royal priest began the ancient ceremony, and before midnight struck, King Lucien Dravenhart and Mira Elwood were bound in marriage beneath the ancient laws of the vampire kingdom. The glowing curse marks on their wrists slowly faded away. Instead of death, the magic transformed into a new symbol, one of unity rather than punishment. The nobles who once mocked the humble maid could only watch as the girl they underestimated became their queen. And from that day forward, the kingdom of Nightfall remembered a lesson that would echo for generations. Never judge someone's worth by their status, because sometimes the most powerful queen begins as the kindest maid.